I work for a criminal defense firm that's throughout the state, so I've changed a little bit in my focus. I primarily do criminal defense. So it's changed for a while. For a while there, I was doing a lot more civil things. So it's kind of good to get back into the criminal world, and it's interesting. And certainly there's a tie-in to what we're talking about with the Markel case.
So do you still practice in Leon County sometimes?
Sometimes I go from Escambia in the far corner of the Panhandle of Pensacola all the way to Tallahassee. So I'm in court in Tallahassee maybe every 4 or 5 weeks.
Yeah. Is it kind of weird going against people you used to work with?
It could be, but the turnover is high. Being a prosecutor is kind of a young person's game. People go into that as their first job out of law school. And so the turnover, most of the people that I was a prosecutor with are no longer there. I see more of the defense attorneys that have been around for a while, 10, 15, 20 years, that I see them more so than I see any of the prosecutors that I know. Of course, like the case we're talking about, Georgia Kappelman, people that are playing on that level, kind of the major leagues of being a prosecutor, they've been there a while, but most of the cases I handle are much more mundane than the Markel case.
In like the DWI type cases or robberies?
A lot of DUIs. Last week I had an aggravated battery. Started out as a murder case, ended up being an aggravated battery, and then I represented the client after he violated probation. So he's facing about 10 years in prison. So I had to try to figure a way out for him on that. But a lot more DUIs and traffic cases than anything. That's kind of the bread and butter of most defense attorneys in the area. Now, somebody like Alex Morris, who your audience knows, who's part of the team for Donna, he's much more serious cases more often. He's probably doing more robberies, more homicide cases than the average defense attorney, because your bread and butter in the criminal defense world would be DUIs, lower felonies, kind of like in a family. If you're a family law attorney, your bread and butter is going to be, initial divorces, maybe modifications of child custody. More rare are you going to get something like a grandparents' rights case or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. So what did you think about today's hearing?
It's a little wild. I mean, it's a little interesting to see the strategy, but I can certainly understand it. And I think they probably filed all these things not expecting them to be ultimately successful. But why do you do that? Well, you've got a client that's been, sitting in jail all this time. She's emotional. She saw her son get convicted and go off to prison. So if you're her attorney, you're playing at the major leagues, you've got to do something. So part of it is to just meet the client's expectations that you're doing something. You're kind of firing a broadside against the prosecution. You're trying to take the momentum from them. And it's kind of like Pirates of the Caribbean or something, when the two ships first meet each other, and they turn the ships and they fire a broadside. And that's kind of the way they start this battle. Maybe you set some things up for an appeal. Maybe you try to get the momentum and just keep the pressure on the prosecutor. But it's interesting. And it's kind of like we were talking a little bit before the segment started. She's even trying to exclude her other son, Robert's testimony. Why? Well, you're going to sort of try to knock down every single piece the state may have to take out any kind of little piece that they could put on the board that's going to be unfavorable to you. And it's like a shotgun approach. I mean, a lot of metaphors come to mind, but it's like you throw everything you can against the state, to try to see what comes of it. And but it's interesting to watch, and it's interesting to see Mr. Rashbaum and go through some of these motions that they filed. And things like that. But I'm not surprised really by the outcome of this, the loss of the motion to dismiss and the loss of the motion to exclude evidence and so forth that have come to this point.
So would you have filed all those motions? I mean, just from what you know, would you do it too?
I don't know if I would have filed all of them. I think if you're playing at that level, you may have to do some things like that again, just to get your client's confidence back, to get the momentum back. I don't know that I'd really be too enthused to take her case in the first place, but if I did, I think to play at that level, you would probably need to come up with a strategy like this. They've definitely got to do something a little different from Charlie's trial. And I think to meet the new evidence that's coming at them, I think they probably felt like they had to do something to slow the state down a little bit. I don't know that I would have tried to exclude Robert's testimony or things like that. I don't know that I would have done the motion to dismiss based on the time that's elapsed. I felt like that was a weak one. And then particularly in Florida, there's a really technical point that if you don't file a motion to dismiss on or before arraignment, you can waive that, which seems a little strange. Judge Everett didn't deny the motion for that reason. He went on to look at the merits, but they probably would have had a better chance at this if they had filed it right at the beginning. I mean, obviously they knew when Donna was arrested, the case was approaching 10 years old at that point. She had been indicted. If they wanted to file a motion right then and there before her arraignment, they could have. So, but just interesting to see the strategy that they put forward.
Yeah. Well, I did think it was so strange when I heard about her, whatever you call it, like a secretive motion to try to suppress her oldest son's testimony. I mean, what could possibly be the basis that it's too prejudicial?
Well, it's interesting to have a secret motion. I mean, if you file something, you're going to argue something in court, it's not going to be secret. Certainly not going to be secret for long. There's no secrets in the Leon County courthouses. Once that hits the court file, it's not a secret anymore. But yeah, relevance, and you could say relevance, but you could also say that it's so long ago what he would have to offer. I mean, he's sort of been disassociated from the family for more than a decade. So how much insight is really relevant to the ongoing case would probably be some good arguments. I think I probably would have waited to trial and maybe objected during the trial to him on relevance grounds. But to sort of do it this way is a little strange, a little different.
Yeah, I've never heard of such a thing. So
yeah, I've never heard of that quite that way either in terms of something being secret. But again, you throw it out there, maybe you get some points with it. You make the state respond to all this stuff and you put pressure on them, and maybe you try to slow them down because the state has to take time to respond to these things and review things. And that's time you're taking them away from the actual case in chief that they'd prefer to be preparing for. And as an attorney, you'd prefer to be preparing to your case. I mean, whether it's a DUI or a homicide, or whether it's a contested hearing in a family law case, you'd rather be preparing for the merits. But now you're over here trying to defend why you should get to call this witness. Yeah. So that may be part of their strategy as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of like flood the prosecutor's office with tons of motions and legal research. Yeah. Well, what about your client's wealth? Like, do you do more if the client can pay? I mean, does that affect your strategy?
That's kind of a almost like a law school professional responsibility.
Yeah, like an ethical type of thing. Yeah.
It really is. And I think it could be a little different for each attorney, depending on what you feel is right and wrong, how your firm is set up. You know, the only way really to make money as a family law attorney or as a civil attorney is to bill by the hour. So sort of inherent in that, if a client is wanting you to do all this work and they're the kind of person that expects constant efforts from you, like they want to email you every day, they want to talk on the phone every day, if you can bill for that, you make more money. Obviously, if they could pay more, you know, and they want that, you can bill and your time is compensated. And that's kind of how I would look at it, in the sense that if I have a client that wants that, I'm honest with them up front. And I've had some clients, I've told them, you know, I think you should settle this case now. Like I had a child custody case a couple of years ago. I told the client, I think you should settle this. I pretty much know what the judge is going to do. You know, if you want to just go after the mother of your child and put her through all this just because you're angry with her, you're gonna pay me a lot of money. You're gonna pay me about $15,000, and you're really not going to get anywhere. But he wanted to go forward and do it. Now, some attorneys I think would probably go more so on the, you know, this guy's got a lot of money, I'm just going to soak him. I'm going to file motions and you know, do that. But I think there's really a gray area there, and I think you could be ethical and you can do the right thing, and it may look a little differently, person to person, attorney to attorney. But on the lower end of that, you know, there are clients sometimes that they can't afford to pay you a lot, but their case requires a lot of work. And, you know, I think all of us have probably been in a situation where we've done a lot more work for a client than they really could pay us or ever will pay us. But it's kind of like, we want to do a good job as a professional, or we believe in helping them. And that, again, could look different for each person and not necessarily be, you know, right or wrong. And it's a little different from a medical situation. Like if I go to the hospital and I'm indigent, you know, and I have a broken arm, they're going to treat me. They're not going to just, you know, kick me outside because I can't pay. With us, it's a little different. We're going to take our most valuable commodity, which is our time, and help somebody. And you know, they can come into the office, not have any money. That's where we kind of have to screen out what we can do and can't do. And it's a strange thing to talk about. And some people don't really understand that. They get mad at us. And, you know, I'm sure you've probably heard clients and people out there say, well, you attorneys, you charge so much money, and, you know, $300 an hour, and, you know, just taking people's money.
But you didn't do anything for me. I paid this lawyer thousands of dollars, and he didn't do anything for me.
You know, I mean, and they don't understand, though, that you have an office that you're paying a rent for. You know, you're paying subscriptions to Westlaw and Lexis. You're paying your legal assistants and paralegals.
Yeah.
You have all these bills, and it's different. Like if you go to a place and get a new transmission put in your car, you know, the bill is $4,000, you know, to do this. Nobody questions and says, well, you know, you're charging me too much for it. They don't, you know, they understand that the mechanic has a shop and several people working there, and the parts cost money, and the labor per hour, you know, you're going to pay for all that. But it's different in the legal thing, you know, and, oh, you're going to charge me $5,000 for that divorce. And it's like, well, I'm going to spend, you know, probably 15 hours of time on that.
Or more.
Yeah. Or more,
yeah.
You know, or much. So it could be different for each person. But it's really interesting to think about that. Now, an attorney like Mr. Rashbaum, I mean, you're talking probably $100,000, $150,000 potentially for a case like this.
Yeah, probably more. I would say more.
You know, and they'll structure that probably by the hour in some instances, and, you know, some instances it may be a flat fee. But it's an incredible amount of time. And this case it almost approaches what you see on television. Like you watch a movie or read a novel, A Time to Kill or something like that, where that one murder case kind of takes over the whole firm. That's all they're doing. It's close to that with something like that. So I can be more sympathetic to Mr. Rashbaum and what he's probably charging than maybe some people in the audience, because he's almost not doing anything else while this case is going. And he's got a client, he's got a client that probably she has to have somebody emotionally supporting her throughout this as well.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a Sunday where she was calling him probably, was it 10 to 20 times on a Sunday? And I think there was a Thanksgiving when Charlie was also calling him. So, it seems like he's expected to drop everything, whenever they need him. So it's like concierge service.
Yeah. And it's the sort of the nature of the case, but it's also her personality. And then I think there's also a dynamic sometimes. I don't know if you've had this experience sometimes, but if you have a client that you really get closer to, or you really, believe in their cause, it can be all consuming like that. And you feel like you can't really not answer their call and things like that. And it gets into how do you keep an appropriate balance as a practitioner to help the person do your job for them, but also, preserve some mental health and physical health in doing something like that. And we've all had cases, I think, like that as a prosecutor, or maybe defending somebody, or you can have a family law situation where your client you feel like is really a good person. The person on the other side may be a really bad person, and you want to help them, but there's a healthy balance there. And I say that to the average person. They don't really understand sometimes, as an attorney, the roles that you play. You're wearing a counselor hat sometimes. You're doing the courtroom thing. You're almost like their LCSW for them. You're almost like the father confessor, the priest for them. And sometimes people think it's easy what we do because, well, you're in an air-conditioned office all day. How hard can it be? But there's stress to it. It's doing a trial stressful. Even if you live for the trials, it can be stressful, and a lot of things go with it.
Yeah. Well, since we were talking just a little bit about the Rob Adelson motion, just wanted to focus on Chuck's comment here. He has relatives that wouldn't want family members testifying about their character admissions. Well, I mean, if Rob were to be called as a witness for the state, could he make any general comments about Donna's character? Like, my mom was so controlling. She meddled in our relationships. She told me who I should marry. Do you think that could come in?
Well, and hello to Chuck, because, Chuck, I know, has been a long time member of the audience. And I'd say you have to really tread carefully there. It would have to be very specifically tied to things that are relevant in this case, because you can't just try Donna on her character or her past misdeeds. If she were to bring out evidence of her character, like saying, I'm a peaceful person, I would never be violent, you could bring countervailing traits of her character to refute that, but she would have to open the door to that. Generally, going into that she's a controlling person is probably not going to be admissible. They would really have to hone in on the relationship with Wendy and make it relevant to that if she's sort of, making decisions for Wendy, or, selecting who she dates, like Dan. I think things like that could potentially be relevant and could be relevant to the ultimate issue of the conspiracy. If the state is trying to go in the direction that Donna pulled the strings on all of this, the state may not want to go in that direction, because I think there's evidence on the other side. And I've seen some commentaries, some podcasters here the past week or so that were alleging, based on the facts that they're looking at, that they thought Wendy could be the one actually pulling the strings to all of this, and sort of as a puppeteer, moving the pieces of her family, manipulating her family to do this for her, and a lot of people throughout this have thought more so that, it was Donna and Charlie maybe that drove the train, but other people now are out there saying that maybe Wendy was doing that. So I don't know which direction the state will go, if anything. You do have the emails, like Donna, that on their surface appear that Donna was really pushing Wendy to take an aggressive line in the divorce, and this is the role you need to play, and things like that I'm sure people remember. But I think a lot of that evidence speaks for itself, that I don't know that they really need specific character things from Robert. Could it be relevant the way they essentially tried to break up his relationship with really the woman he was really in love with, and ultimately, after an intervening marriage, married and had a successful marriage with? Could that be relevant just to the control and the dynamics within the family? I think they might be able to tie that in, but it really has to be relevant to issues of the case.
Yeah. I was thinking that it looks like Rob was sort of in the circle when Wendy was complaining about her divorce and custody cases, or, the whole court stuff going on with Dan, because he was one of those 12 people emailed, in the email chain. So you're right. I think that he could probably testify as to more specific things that had to do with Donna's responses and what she was doing behind the scenes during the divorce and the custody case. So, I don't think he was totally estranged for that whole chunk of time.
That's a good point. That's a good
We're
point.
just guessing. Yeah.
And if he could testify to the reactions that Wendy and Donna had during that initial part of the divorce, to get at really the acrimony that was there, because we have a family that they were willing to pay a couple $1 million to Dan to get him to walk away from shared custody in Tallahassee. They're willing to do that. The acrimony was high. So if Robert has something to say about that, there may be things we don't know that he could add to some of that. So that's a good point, I think, that you brought out.
Yeah. So thank you, Clarissa. Couldn't he also testify as to what they said to him after the murder, how they behaved? I think that could be relevant.
Sure. If he noticed something, it's kind of like Donna and Wendy's behavior at the funeral and other things that we've heard about, or Wendy's behavior at the dinner where she got violently ill. So
I don't think he was there, though. Yeah, I think that was with Charlie. But
if Robert saw or heard similar things in that vein, I think his testimony could be significant. I don't know if he was at the funeral, and I don't think he was at the dinner. I think he was probably estranged by the time that they had the sort of the celebratory dinner.
Celebration dinner.
Yeah. But if he was witness to something similar to that strange behavior, like if he was on a call, after Donna and Wendy got back to Miami after Dan was murdered, and they were, ordering balloons for a party or something like that, that's odd. That could be insightful into what their mindset was. The father of your grandson's has just been murdered. You're ordering cake and party and balloons or something like that. I mean, I don't know what could have been happened, but it could be something like that. If he was a witness to that, could be significant. It could be this just the state is trying to put them on notice and trying to put pressure on the defense. We may call this person. They may decide ultimately not to call them because they have enough with everything else, but they're sort of covering their bases of who they may use. And there may be a little piece that they could use, they could get in from him that would be significant. There may not be much else. They may ultimately decide not to call him.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's something else you mentioned that brought up a question. You mentioned that sometimes the defense attorneys are strategically dumping motions and stuff before trial to stress out the prosecution. So, do you think Georgia and Sarah Dugan have paralegals or people helping them behind the scenes?
They do to an extent. I mean, I know from firsthand seeing how Georgia works and cases at that level that they have either an investigator or somebody, the equivalent of a paralegal, that's helping them put things together. They're very organized. I'm very impressed by like the way they did their witness list and their exhibit list. It is all laid out there the way you'd use it at trial. So that makes it easy for the clerks in the courtroom to follow things. It makes it easy for the judge to follow things, opposing counsel. And it's also like a checklist for them to use. So that's impressive. That's a good way of doing things. And it speaks to, somebody's working hard on having all this organized, whether that's possibly Georgia doing that or Sarah Catherine herself doing that, or they've got a team member doing that. But they certainly have people. They're certainly, but besides the attorneys, there are probably 2 or 3 other people actively in that office working on this case, which is significant. The typical felony case in Tallahassee, you really just have the prosecutor and you have a legal assistant that's going to do the most basic things, but you don't have a team of people. Where the rubber hits the road on a trial, it seems like you have the huge state of Florida and all those resources versus the citizen in a typical criminal trial. And it is true, the average person, you're going up against the state. The state has a lot more a lot more power, a lot more resources, but it all comes down to really one prosecutor versus often a defense attorney with a lot more experience and probably more resources on that particular case. On a murder case, it's different. They do have a ton of resources within the office, more so than any other case going forward. In this case in particular, because it's so big, it's so high profile. It's just the nature of the case, everything involved in it. And then in addition to that, they've got all the law enforcement people that are, going to be helping with anything that they need. A lot of people on that witness list, really, really experienced people. I saw that they had Mr. Cornegay, who was retired TPD, sort of a CSI person, Joanne Maltese, another one. These are really, really smart people. And, if they need an exhibit or a diagram or, they talk to one of these witnesses and say, how would you explain this in court? I mean, they're ready to go. I mean, they're ready to do this right now.
Okay, that's great to hear. I mean, do you sometimes wish you were back in the office again so you could work on this case? I don't know. I mean, just wondering, since you still follow the Markel case.
In some ways I enjoy watching it more than being a participant. I'm certainly all the way through. I've been rooting for the state, for Georgia, for Sarah Catherine. I have a lot of respect for them. And I think you could probably tell I have a lot of respect for the law enforcement involved in the case, from Craig Isom all the way through it. Do I miss that? I think, as a younger attorney, that's probably the best job you can have is to be a prosecutor. you get so much experience, you get to do so many interesting things and meet people that you never would otherwise, and you get to help people. And I do miss those aspects of it. I don't miss the tempo of it, where you are sitting waiting on a jury verdict and you're filling out a form to do subpoenas on your next trial week, and it's just constant.
Oh,
So
yes. So tons of work and stress for
tons
kind of low pay, would you say?
tons of it, and the pay relatively low. And to get to where the pay is more favorable, you have to be doing it for quite a while. Miss Kappelman has been doing this for I want to say probably since 2002 or so. She started a couple years before I did. So the pay is okay then, but she's really paid her dues. She's put in a lot of time, a lot of really hard work over the years to get to that level. It can be a tough job. And I think in a lot of ways you're thrown in there as a baby. I was 23 or 24 years old, and, you really get thrown into the fire. It's a lot of great experience, but then there's also a really steep learning curve on some things. And ultimately you've got people's lives in your hands to a great degree. So I don't know that I miss all that pressure for something like this. But I'm certainly rooting for the state, and hopefully they have a smooth path ahead on this, and they have a smooth path to proving the case and to convincing the jurors of this. I feel like the evidence that we have talked about over the years and some of the new things that we're talking about now, they've got a very strong case, and they just need to focus and keep going the way they have, and bring this one to a conclusion as well.
Yeah. So just starting from the beginning with the questions, Jesus Lover wanted to know, did you work under Mutz? So the answer is yes, right?
Yes, and that's what really got me involved talking about the case publicly, because I was not in any kind of public role on this case or any kind of role with this case in the beginning. I was just like anybody else in Tallahassee, July of 2014, when a professor was murdered. It was just such a shock to the community that a man could be shot in his driveway in Tallahassee. And it was in a part of town that you just didn't see things like that happen. I mean, there are parts of town in Tallahassee where violent activity can be prevalent, or some places just at random at a store or something, there could be a robbery or things like that happen. But in somebody's driveway in that part of town, that was really shocking. And the connection, I went to FSU Law School before Mr. Markel was a professor there. So all of those things, I was really taken in by the case, and it was kind of a mystery. It was kind of a whodunit. And at first they were looking for the Prius. They were looking for the bad guys. They didn't know who they were. The public didn't know. So it took me in on that level. But then being in the office, as the member of the audience was saying, I worked for that office, and I was a division chief over misdemeanor divisions, so the not serious cases. But I was, pulled into the staff meetings that all the leaders of that office would have. And so that case would be discussed. The Markel case would be discussed. And then people would tell me things because the case didn't seem like it was going in the right direction. It seemed like it wasn't getting off the ground. So people would tell me things about it. And then ultimately I was put in a position where I could go public with it, and I could use, I think some credibility that maybe I had built up to try to get the word out there that something was not quite right with the case not going forward. And then people involved in the investigation of this case would reach out to me and say, hey, have you heard things in the office? Like, why won't they approve the charges? Why won't they approve search warrants in this case? Why are they not wanting to go forward at that point against anybody except for Mr. Rivera and Mr. Garcia. Ultimately, all that was worked past, and I think it's a lot of credit to Georgia, Sarah Catherine, Craig Isom, all of these people that not only did they charge the two driving the car, pulling the trigger, but they actually now have charged the ones that actually really pulled the trigger by building this instrument to kill somebody and paying for it. So that's kind of what led me to be involved in it. And I think I was probably the first one to comment publicly that, the Adelson should be charged and they're not, and sort of raised a red flag on that. And then other people picked up on that. There was the Over My Dead Body podcast, probably pushed it forward to a huge degree. And, David Ladd and other people that were early on really pushed this forward. Justice for Dan on Facebook really pushed this forward. But I was probably the first person really to publicly say, there's enough evidence to go forward. Why aren't they doing something?
Yeah. Well, did you ever get any talking to by Willie Meggs or anyone for, kind of speaking out and saying, hey, these Adelsons should be charged?
Well, the reason I had a voice was because he fired me shortly before that. So, he pretty much turned me loose to be able to be free to say what I wanted to say at that point. Because, if you are a prosecutor, you don't talk to the press. That's just not really appropriate. But once he cut me loose, my lips were unsealed. I was unchained to really talk about this case and to talk about the Sims murders and other cases that, for whatever reason, really weren't being addressed. There are other cold cases in Tallahassee that, there's one case, for instance, a gentleman was murdered, I think back in the 80s, and he made a visit to Tallahassee to see Willie Meggs around 2015, and nothing was done about it. And I was free then to say, well, the office is spending a lot of time on internet gambling parlors, but they're not spending time on these cold cases. So it freed me to say really what I felt was right, and gave me a platform to try to advocate for these things. Now, ultimately, did I accomplish anything on this case? I don't know. I think, probably David Latt had a lot more of a role. Mentor, lawyer, Over My Dead Body. I think all of them deserve the credit, I think, for pushing the case forward. And I think the patience and the grace of Dan Markel's family, I think, pushed it forward, that ultimately enough momentum built that the case had to go forward against really everybody that was involved in it. And I think, the petition that was done, maybe played a little bit of a role. Probably
the one trying to get Wendy to let the Markels see the children. That petition.
Well, there's actually one that people did trying to get the state attorney to prosecute the Adelsons.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that.
And I think a lot of those things added up to the fact that, you sort of have the winds to the backs of the prosecutors. They're the winds filling the sails, and they're going to start being propelled forward. They're going to do what's right. But ultimately, Jack Campbell deserves credit. Georgia, Sarah Catherine, they deserve a ton of credit that they went where the evidence, led them to go. But in the beginning, it was really up in the air. Things that happened with, the state attorney saying, law enforcement, you go ahead and arrest him if you think you want to, but get ready for a lawsuit. That never happens. You pick up the phone if you have a problem and you say, hey, y'all are looking at charging the Adelsons. Here's what you got. Here's what I think you need in the case. You don't put that out in the media. But that's what happened. And then both sides accused each other of leaking stuff in the press. And I don't know a reason for it. Was it just personality issues or ego that, Willie didn't want the police department to do something, and they weren't doing what he wanted. So was it an ego thing? I don't know, but you would hope the elected state attorney could pick up the phone and call the chief of police and say, hey, here's what you think you have, here's what we need to do to actually successfully prosecute this. Let's work this out. But that's not what happened. And then the case got delayed. And I think the Adelsons ultimately, with all the probable cause affidavits put out there prematurely, they could sort of prepare themselves to dig in and fight. And then Katie's not going to flip. You end up having to flip Rivera. So in some ways, this case drug out for a lot longer than it had to. If they had charged most of them or all of them right in the beginning, it probably would have fallen into place that Katie would have flipped. You'd put Sigfredo, Garcia, Rivera in prison for their role. You put Donna and Charlie in prison for their role. And that could have been done in a 4 or 5 year span instead of 10. But that's all kind of, what if, ultimately the prosecutors did a really good job working on this. They've consistently gone through this. I don't think they would have chosen originally to go sort of piecemeal one at a time, really slow. But that strategy ultimately, whether it was forced on them or not, it's become successful. They've convicted Katie for her role. Now they've gone on to Donna, and they've made it work, and they've worked really hard. And so, I'm pleased of the results that they've got, and I hope they'll continue.
Yeah. Plus, they've gotten a little bit more evidence, from Donna's phone, the iPads, hopefully more phone calls, Donna's notebook. So, yeah. So I feel like it's a pretty strong case against Donna. What do you think?
I do too. And the tablets, the search warrants, and some of the things that have come out recently, emails between Donna and Wendy. It is a different case from 2016. It's stronger, much stronger. And I think the Dolce Vita recording, I think, does add something to this. I think Katie's testimony is a new thing. And I think that led Judge Everett, part of the facts that led him to deny the motion to dismiss, although I think he could have denied it based on other facts as well, is Katie's testimony, the things that she filled in, little gaps. Like, Donna, it seems very strongly that she's the delivery person for the money the night of the murders. The message, I'm right outside your house. I don't know about the audience or you, but if I'm driving on the interstate, I wouldn't text somebody and say, I'm right outside your house. I would say, I'm passing through town or something like that. Or, I'm on I-95, I'm heading through Daytona or something like that. I'm not going to say I'm right outside your house unless I'm right outside your house. And
exactly. It means what it means. I'm outside your house. So,
and she washed the money, laundered the money. That's something Donna would do.
That was Katie's guess, which I always thought it was weird how the defense did not really cross-examine Katie on that point. Maybe they didn't think it was worth pointing out because they didn't know what she would say. But, it sounded like Katie was just guessing because there was mold later. But, who knows if she really washed it or not. I have no idea. But I wouldn't put it past Donna because Katie did say that Charlie was very fanatical about handling the envelope and the papers and stuff. He printed the papers from maybe his office printer or a different printer, and he was wearing gloves when he put the paper and sealed the envelope and stuff. So, it's still a big question mark in regards to washing money.
It is, and there is a risk if they'd asked her more questions about that, she might have gotten into something that made it more incriminating. Like, Charlie always said his mother was, obsessive about being clean and
germs on the money. That's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
But I do think the correlation with not leaving evidence, I think, goes with that. She didn't want to leave DNA on it. If you left sweat on the money, if you handled that money and you got your sweat on it, here I'm going to try to make sure there's no DNA on it. So I think that was interesting, and I think that was a different piece we didn't know about, and I think it ties in, and it's new evidence against Donna. I think it's strong circumstantial evidence, and I think the case against Donna is strong, and I don't think it's really much weaker than the case against Charlie. And I know Mr. Rashbaum is obviously going to put on the best face for his client. I think, he's certainly going to do that, but I don't think the case against his client is weak.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the attorneys, how well do you know Alex Morris? Have you had cases against him?
I have, as a prosecutor, certainly he'd be somebody I'd see in court once a week. And, I don't remember exactly how many cases, but certainly argued motions against him and certainly probably tried a case or two against him. He's very good. He's very competent. He's somebody that doesn't get flustered at all. He's kind of unflappable and just a very steady person and very good. He has a good sense of humor. I think he has he's really bright. And it's, I think, just a really, if I were in trouble, I'd want somebody like him. And he'll fight very hard for his client. And I know he will certainly bring a lot to the case, but ultimately the facts are pretty strong against Donna. And I think it's going to be really hard to defend her with the story that's locked in, that there's this conspiracy, the Latin Kings are going to kill somebody and, set up her son. Why would they not just rob him and save themselves all the trouble, but they're locked into that story.
Yeah. Okay. T. Kinsella, do you think Rashbaum has a flat fee or billing by the hour? Well, he told Mentor Lawyer a long time ago that it was a flat fee, but things could have changed. I don't know. What's your guess?
They could have, at that level, it doesn't really make a huge difference because, if somebody's going to pay $150,000 up front, it doesn't really make much difference. You're going to get that money either way. If they put $150,000 in a trust account and you bill on that, you're just kind of going it's a longer way around to get to that. I don't know what the fee arrangement is. Do they have to pay a certain amount down and then he'll get the rest after the trial? I mean, that could make a difference, but he's looking at a lot of money for this. And, like I was saying before, rightfully so, because it's a lot of work, and he'll have to turn away a lot of other things he could have done, to help other clients by doing this. This is the type of case that once this is going to trial, he's not going to be doing anything else during that week or two that this is going.
Yeah. So I seem to recall in Donna's notebook, she did write something about having to pay Dan Rashbaum $75K. So maybe it's like periodic payments. Do you think?
That could certainly be possible. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, Rosemary. She said, "Did you hear Georgia say windy, windy, windy?" Yes, I did. Yes, it was pretty interesting because, we could pick up on what Georgia was whispering here and there, which luckily she didn't say anything embarrassing, but
it's always
yeah,
a
that
risk.
was interesting. Huh?
There's
What?
always a risk when you've got microphones on, and especially in the courtroom, they really do pick up conversations at the table that you don't always want picked up.
Yeah. Well, I can't remember exactly what was going on when Georgia whispered that, but it makes me think that she knows that Wendy was behind this. I don't know. I mean, we're just guessing, but why would Georgia say that? And she said it sort of in this mocking, accusatory tone.
Well, Wendy,
So,
and Wendy and Georgia, in a way, I don't want to say like they're the nemesis of each other, but there is a little bit of that personality that obviously Georgia's very skilled. She's take charge prosecutor. The occasions that Wendy's been in the courtroom opposite her, it's almost like this match between the two. And so I don't know if Georgia meant it in that context of somebody like Wendy. It's almost like you might say about a child, Wendy, Wendy, Wendy,
kind of scolding, you think?
or almost a little bit of amusement mixed with consternation at the same time, that the person is, Wendy thinks she's very smart. She's able to sort of manipulate this a little bit, or if not that, just that she's riding the fence through this to testify, to not incriminate herself or her family, to get through this and get out of there and fly back to Miami. I mean, you could say all of that, or could it be something that Georgia says that knowing the next step will be Wendy, 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 I'm coming for you, that type of thing. Hard to say. And I still don't know what Wendy's role is in this. I mean, I can only try to look at the evidence, and there are some things that I think a lot of people have talked about that would seem to tie her in as more than a passive, recipient of this. And some things that are subtle, like buying the bullet bourbon and some of these things like that. But we still don't know 100%. I can't say I know 100% what her role was, but I think Georgia probably, with some of those messages, is lasered in on that. I think she's probably pretty confident of what she feels she can prove or not prove on Wendy.
But also made me kind of happy to see those WhatsApp messages between Scott Radius and Harvey. And what's even funnier is that Harvey started out by saying something like, "Oh, these are all encrypted," as if he were reminding Scott that it's okay to talk on WhatsApp because they're not going to find out. So did you happen to see Mentor Lawyers recent video?
I did. I was watching that before coming on with you, and I thought that was kind of interesting, the whole thing. And the fact that Charlie and Scott would buy this condo in Vietnam and all of this is just such a surreal thing. And but I did pick up on the messages. It's like, okay, yeah, it's okay to talk. This is encrypted,
Yeah, they'll never find out. So let's speak freely on WhatsApp.
But there's back doors to all these things, and it's kind of like, you try to warn your family, or you try to warn your kids about any of this stuff. Once you hit send on anything, you can assume you're not the only one that's going to read it, and it's out there. And it's a topic in the news in the sense of how much access the government could have to Telegram or to WhatsApp or any of these things. But WhatsApp is definitely not on the more secure end. They have the back door for for law enforcement. And I think Harvey kind of got led down the primrose path on that in terms of thinking, that's totally safe. And there's probably things in those messages that we haven't heard yet that, maybe fancy fiction or someone that really, really dives into the digital on this may know, but there's probably more stuff coming that we haven't talked about publicly yet.
Right. I think Fancy is out there watching. So thank you, Fancy Fiction, for showing us all those wiretaps. It really helped people understand the whole case. So do you watch Fancy Fiction? Not to
I
put
do.
you on the spot.
Yeah. Well, I do, and particularly with those calls, because she really did the hard work that, it is hard work sitting there for hours with headphones, doing that and trying to figure out what people are actually saying, because it's difficult to hear. Sometimes conversations, the way people speak, and she put in hours and hours on those things.
Yeah. Did you ever have to do that? I think I heard somewhere, maybe it was on SDS, that the state attorney has attorneys listening every day to all these jail calls. So is that true?
It may not be quite so regimented as that, but I would often have to listen to the jail calls and on a case, and you almost have to on a case like this, because it's almost malpractice not to. People are talking all the time, and they can't stop talking, and there's often useful bits of information that you have, and it's fascinating psychologically to think about it, because there's warnings on the phones right there in the jail, and there's audible warnings that these things are being recorded and subject to monitoring. But they'll sit there and, I've had some domestic violence cases where the abuser is on the jail calls trying to get other family to send messages to the victim to go up and drop charges. And murder cases, I've had murder cases where they're talking about the murder, and I've had some useful pieces of information come from those. But it's hard work to listen to them, because you're really straining to try to hear meaning. What did they just say? And then also psychologically, you're almost like you're right there with that person and their family, their dynamics, and everything that they're talking about. And it's almost hard to get it out of your head once you spend weeks listening to somebody. You almost feel you hear their voice, when you stop.
Like listening to all these mundane things that they're rambling about. Were you able to speed up the audio to make it go by faster?
When I started, I think we probably still had cassette tapes.
Cassette tapes? What? That's horrible. Yeah.
And then later CDs, where you couldn't really listen to it sped up, but you could kind of skip through stuff that was clearly not relevant. But it's many hours of painstaking time. I had one colleague who was a prosecutor at the time, and she would play them in her car when she's driving around. She'd play them listening to the car, and that was kind of clever way to save some time.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if my car could have played them or not, but I would, listen to them in the office, and it's very important evidence. And but you also can get a good insight into the people you're dealing with as well, which I think is important.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. So Dila O says, do y'all think the statement Georgia said that the jail calls will not be? No, she didn't say that. She just said the specific jail calls involving Charlie weren't going to be used, which makes sense, because I think the stuff that Donna said on that, what would you call it? jail call where she forgot to hang up and she kept talking and was talking about non-extradition and possibly trying to kill herself or, complaining. Yeah, that's definitely a lot more important for her prosecution.
Purely her words, her voice, an admission by a party. So that definitely is coming in. And so I think it makes sense what they're trying to do with the jail calls.
Okay, correct. Yeah, thank you guys. I know I'm totally behind on all these questions and stuff. So let me scroll through. Okay, thank you. I think she said, yeah, she wouldn't be using Charlie's, but maybe hopefully she'll use the hot mic commentary when Charlie wasn't speaking. Yeah.
I think so. I think she'll use that one.
Yeah. Okay. Let me see if there are any other questions. If Donna wasn't involved or had anything to do with the crime, why would she need to have any evidence dismissed or suppressed? It makes Donna look guilty when she's trying to get. Yeah, that's why all these motions are heard before the trial, so it doesn't prejudice the jury. So
that's right.
Yeah, and it's all like Jeremy said, this is all just procedural, what do you call it, rigmarole that a lot of attorneys feel like they still have to at least try to suppress stuff, to earn their fees.
I think that's a part of it. And I think with a really high profile case, an attorney at that level, they're going to show, they want to show what they can do. They want to show what they can do for their client. They kind of want to boost their client a little bit, particularly with Donna. She's seen her son convicted. She's been in jail all these many months. And this is something that now we're fighting back. And I think it's something that you want to try to get the momentum on your side.
Okay. Let's see, are you personally planning on going to the trial?
I'm thinking about doing so, at least maybe for one day, but sometimes it's difficult for me to juggle my court schedule whereas, with some of the people who are doing really good coverage of the trial, I can sit wherever I am and just watch it. And that's, really advantageous for me, but I do want to get there at least one day and see it in person.
So is there any particular witness that you really want to see?
No, to be honest, I really would like to see the closings. That's the part that I like to watch the most. That's the purest form to me of a lawyer being a lawyer is making that final argument. So that's often the time in the courtroom where it's really packed, though. So I'm not sure when I'll get to be there. I would think, besides closings, if Donna testifies, that would be a very fascinating part of it as well. I think always when a defendant testifies, because it's somewhat rare for a defendant to testify, and particularly in a case like this, although that I think the trend has been changing lately in a murder case to have more defendants testify and actually help themselves to some extent. That would be interesting to see. I would like to be there for that, but whether that's in the cards for me over the next couple of weeks, I'm not sure.
Yeah. So I was thinking that would be great to be there when Donna testifies. But then again, I was there when Charlie took the stand, but I ended up just watching from the comfort of my hotel because I didn't want to give him an audience. I was so disgusted. I was like, I don't even want to be there listening to this kind of crap because it just, watching him even on the screen just aggravated me so much that,
Well,
I,
and
it
it was so
gave me
long.
the yucky feelings.
Yeah, and it was so long. If it had been a couple hours, I would say, yeah, that would really just be fascinating to see it. Again, high profile case of this level, murder case. It's a case we all care about seeing justice happen. But I want to say he was on the stand for something. What was it, like 8 or 9 hours?
Yeah, it seemed like the whole day, maybe
So
more. Yeah.
it spilled into the next day, the next morning, if I remember correctly. So that would be, not the most enjoyable thing to watch. I mean, if you're Dan's family, obviously they want to be there throughout if they can, but um, it's difficult to commit that much to it if you're not family, especially if you're sitting through somebody who you feel is not telling the truth, or
Yeah, just the disgust and I don't know, inner turmoil. So yeah. So Porky's Pal, that's a nice name. What's next we're hearing about? Well, there were some things that the judge didn't go ahead and make a ruling on today, like the whole thing about Corbett's summary slides. It sounded like he actually wanted to hear from Corbett before making a decision. So it had to do with the admissibility of the summary presentation, which Rashbaum was complaining and saying that it just looked like Georgia Kappelman's closing argument, and he didn't want it presented to the jury as an exhibit. So do you have any comments about that?
The judge may want to hear from the witness just to proffer what the testimony and the exhibits are. Mm-hmm. Sometimes judges want to get a little bit closer to trial or maybe into the trial before they rule on things like that, kind of see what the evidence is that comes out that would allow the evidence to be admitted or support the use of the exhibit. So I could see that. I could see he may want to have a proffer of what the exhibits are going to be and what the testimony would be around them.
Yeah. And also the judge didn't make a ruling about Lacasse's testimony about Wendy told me, was it 5 days before the shooting, that Charlie had looked into hiring a hitman the previous year and it would cost about $15,000 or $50,000. So the judge said he hadn't finished his research on that. So what's your feeling on that?
It's a little different problem because now it's a co-conspirator statement. So if I understand the objections correctly, it would be hearsay because you're talking about a statement between Charlie and Mr. Lacasse. So that ordinarily wouldn't come into evidence unless there's some exception. But Charlie and Donna, according to the state's theory, are co-conspirators. So that statement would be admissible through that exception. But the judge, will have to, make a ruling on that and preserve the record for appeal to make sure. But I would say that's coming in. I don't see that being a problem.
Yeah. Or they could just use it for impeachment again, which is what happened last time when Wendy claimed that she had never made such a statement. So, okay. Do you have time to answer some more questions, or you need to leave?
Within 5 or 10 minutes or so, but be happy to within that time frame.
Sure. Okay. Do you think Rashbaum's telling Donna to look depressed, tired, and scared to try to get sympathy from the court and future jurors?
Well, I mean, these cases are not in a vacuum. You try them in public opinion, you try them to the jury. Donna has to come across as likable. She can't come across the way she did at her first appearance. And some of the feisty Donna, that can't be the Donna that they see. So yes, I think he's working with her on that to improve her image and to behave in a way that doesn't torpedo her case just being in the courtroom.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, even at Charlie's trial, his attorney told him, don't smile ever. But he couldn't help himself anyway. I mean, he was still like snickering and, like almost laughing at times and just looking like such a arrogant person. So, I mean, there's only so much you can change your client's character.
It comes out, and Charlie, it came out particularly on cross where he would quote the exhibit numbers to Georgia on certain pieces of evidence. That didn't help him. And I think it came out if the jury at any point thought he was likable, or if at any point they thought anything he said made sense, that kind of stuff kind of made him then again seem like the maestro again. I'm the smartest guy in the room, and that didn't help him.
Yeah. So how did you feel when you heard about Donna getting arrested? Did you watch the news as soon as it happened?
I think so. I think relatively soon. I saw it on social media, probably, or on the news, and try to pull up the story. But the way I felt like this is the day we've been waiting for. To have a more complete justice for Dan Markel, and it's one more piece of this being. One more block of this being cemented into place. And that's kind of how I felt.
Great. Okay. Do you think Harvey will attend the trial?
I don't think he wants to be anywhere near that courtroom. And that's been the pattern throughout this. I think in some ways it might be more helpful to his wife if he were there. Again, to humanize him, kind of like what the other question referred to. Her image in the courtroom, her demeanor is going to be central, and for her to have a family member supporting her, I think makes a difference. You humanize the person. I mean, it just shows she has a spouse that cares about her. She is accused of some really horrible things, and the jury is going to have to decide whether they believe that's true or not. And here's somebody standing by her or sitting behind her, I think could be important, but I don't see him coming.
Yeah, I don't think he would either, because he probably would feel really awkward having to sit so close to the Markels. So it would just be really physically uncomfortable and mentally uncomfortable for him. Yeah. So, let's see. Okay, T. Cancel said, what if they arrested Wendy and Harvey on the same day? I don't think that would happen. Somehow I think that if they do arrest somebody, it would probably be Wendy next, because I don't see as much evidence about Harvey doing anything. I mean, I'm sure he knew, but I don't know what else is out there with the phones and the iPad and emails.
I would tend to agree. And Jack Campbell made some comments in the press not too long ago where he thought there wasn't enough on Harvey. I think it was shortly after Donna was arrested. And, that may change. I mean, that's not a conclusive statement on the subject, but I think it's somewhat telling, because he didn't make any statement of the kind in reference to Wendy. There are some things, I think in the Dolce Vita recording or in some other statements that Harvey's made that would seem to suggest he knows more about it, but from what I've seen, I don't think he could be charged with anything. I think it's too tenuous. It's almost like, the most they could prove is that he maybe had knowledge of it after the fact. hard to link him to the planning of this from what we have.
Well, even if he knew it was going to happen, I mean, they would still have to probably prove that he actually had something to do with the money, the payment to the hitman. So, I mean, hypothetically, he could have been totally in the dark and just driven Donna to have her give money to Charlie. I don't know. So
No, I think that's right. I think that's right. There, to be an accessory after the fact, you'd have to take some concrete step to help cover it up. To be a principal to it, you have to take some concrete step in furtherance of it. And merely knowing about it or finding out about it's not enough. But I think he did find out about it relatively soon. I think it's clear from some of the communications that have come out.
yeah, and his behavior at the day of the memorial service, people said he was just strange and wouldn't talk to them, wouldn't look them in the eye. So, but like you said, that's not enough to convict somebody, right? So
I agree.
yeah, I think well, Don's not here, but one of my YouTuber friends, Don, wanted to know, is it a crime if you could prove that Wendy incited her family to commit this murder for her? I mean, is that a crime in Florida?
No, because you either have to be an active participant to the conspiracy or you have to be a principal to the homicide. So it's kind of like, it'd be kind of like, maybe this would be a good analogy. Like you pressure your family to say, oh, I really need money and I'm just struggling so much because of money situations. You know, if I had some money come in, I could really straighten out my life and solve all my problems. Okay, you've said that. Now the family's going to go out and plan to rob a bank to get money for that person. You've incited that, but you're not actually driving the car or getting the gun or coming up with a plan to hit which bank and when. And so I think that's the key distinction. And I do wonder about that. I wonder if she cried on their shoulders about the divorce and how she stated she was treated with Dan, whether that has any truth or not. You know, she may have been manipulating all along that I'm being mistreated, I'm miserable, I'm unhappy in my marriage. And now the divorce, you know, he's trying to take my license, he's trying to take my money, he's trying to put me in jail. And, you know, she's lamenting all this. And so they care about her. They come together and say, we're going to solve this problem. Look at the way he's treating our sister. Look at the way he's treating our daughter, my little girl. And so they come up with this plan to solve the problem. And so you could say that she incited it by that. But the link is not there to say she's actually a principal to carrying this out. To now, where a lot of people disagree is just what would fill in those links. Would trying to get Dan's schedule a week or two in advance, would that be a piece? Would buying the bourbon and going by his house that day and coming up with the television story that she's got an alibi that she's created after she, you know, after she's established he's going to be in town and all that sort of thing. Maybe it gets there. And then if there are other messages that we haven't seen in the public record, you know, maybe it gets there and the links of the chain are there that she's actually a principal to this. That's what the state would have to prove to indict her.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I was definitely surprised when I saw that text she had sent to Dan when she was physically, I guess, in her parents' condo during a visit, where she specifically asked if he was going to be around July 14th through the 18th. So that seemed pretty odd because supposedly she just wanted to do something with the kids on the 16th. So
it does, and it seems that you could argue Jeffrey Lacasse, she did the same thing with him to see where he's going to be, and if she could get the ex-husband tied down to a spot and then also get the on again, off again boyfriend where he doesn't have an alibi, that's arguable that could be what the evidence shows. Now, the reverse to that, if I'm defending Wendy, I would say, well, of course she's going to be texting Dan, the father of her two children, where he's going to be because they share custody and they hand off custody throughout the week and maybe sometimes on a day-to-day basis, depending on what's going on. And there'd be times where Dan would come see the kids outside of his custody because he wanted to be that involved. So it wasn't something where, he would have the kids completely for his week. I think they changed overnight and on a Wednesday night and things like that. So she could say, of course I am doing that. And then the same thing with Jeffrey Lacasse. It's like, we're kind of on again, off again. And I wanted to know what he was doing this weekend. Like I'll show you my phone. I did the same thing the weekend before, So there's multiple views of that, but I think you could string enough together. If you could, you may have a circumstantial case that would hold up on Wendy. And,
yeah. I mean, I felt optimistic, but what do I know? I'm just somebody on YouTube who's been watching everything that's publicly available. But also, I also recall that Rivera said they were told they had to get the job done by Friday because the guy was going to be leaving. He was going to be going out of town on Saturday. So where would they have gotten that from? I mean, again, it could have been Donna. It could have been Charlie. We don't know for sure. But, I think because they really wanted to make sure this succeeded, then I think it made sense for them to need Wendy involved to make sure the kids weren't there when the shooting happened and to make sure the hitman knew where he was.
Well, and then do they have her go toward the scene that day as well to verify it happened? That could be what happened, or it could be she did that on her own and wasn't supposed to. And maybe that's one of the reasons why there's a little bit of acrimony between them on a couple points involved in that came out through Charlie's trial. They were kind of upset with Wendy because I think part of it, because she did that, she had that little trip. So certainly could be incriminating that she would make that trip down there because it's not the most direct route to go where she was going. And it's really not a shortcut. So is it a coincidence that she did that the day of? Or maybe not. And I think that's...
Yeah, because until I would like to get info from some people who were actually guests to the party, as well as the people who actually organized the party, because, just seeing some computer printout, anybody could have made that. So, what a coincidence that the day your ex-husband is shot, that you happen to go out and buy bullet bourbon after driving up to the crime scene and doing nothing. Then you're going off to celebrate by buying bullet. So anyway, that's too big of a coincidence to me.
And the television. And I think when you combine that with the television repair, who really gets a television repaired? It's all kind of
cracked screen.
She blamed one of the boys for throwing something at the screen, and that seems very convenient. Could that have happened? I mean, it is, but it just seems like with all of that together, it's really begins to be a stretch to believe, all of these. She must be the most unlucky woman in the world if all these things happen. Her ex-husband's murdered, and she was unlucky enough. It was the day she bought the bullet bourbon and the day the TV repairman was coming.
And the day she was constantly communicating with her brother, who's already been convicted of murder, making phone calls, maybe sending WhatsApp messages and texts and stuff. Yeah. Did you hear about how Wendy's former friend also contacted the Markel's attorneys and spoke with the prosecution?
Sarah Youssef.
Youssef. Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. Once again, we're just guessing because we don't have any insider knowledge. But what do you think that could be if it costs Sarah to become someone listed as a potential witness?
I could only speculate, but if it's more along the lines of things we've heard, like Wendy's behavior at the celebratory party and her violent reaction, becoming ill at that. If it's things like what Jeffrey Lacasse said, that jokes of that nature and things like that, if it's things like that, it could be very significant. But I haven't seen anything so far what it is specifically.
Yeah, so time will tell. Oh, I did want to ask you, do you think that the state would actually fly Scott Radius from wherever he is, Singapore or Vietnam, to testify? Like, do they have the budget to do that?
They certainly could. That would be probably quite expensive, but they certainly could do that. If the defense is willing to agree to let him testify via Zoom, that's certainly a way they can make it work and compromise. But if it primarily is up to the defense, because it's a right of confrontation under the Sixth Amendment. We really have the right to have people there in the courtroom. But if they don't agree to let him testify by Zoom or something like that, then the state would fly him, and they would bear that cost.
So would they still have the subpoena power to compel someone in another country to come to Florida?
Probably not. And technically, you don't have it even within the United States. You'd have to domesticate a subpoena in that state courtroom to compel. If I wanted to compel you to testify in Florida, I'd have to go to a North Carolina court to get a North Carolina judge to issue a direct subpoena to you and do that. And so it's even more cumbersome in another country. And Vietnam, I think that's really the reason why the Adelsons were interested in that, in addition to the low cost of living there, that Vietnam doesn't have a regular extradition process with the United States. So that would be difficult if he didn't want to do it, if he didn't want to cooperate.
Yeah. Do you think could they still show Scott's WhatsApp messages with Harvey, though? I mean, I'm not sure. Could one of the forensic experts still testify about those messages if Scott doesn't come to testify?
There are ways of actually admitting the records themselves as a business record. You could have the WhatsApp custodian of records, if you will, certify that they're accurate and going through the mechanics of admitting them. But then they would have to fall within an exception to the hearsay rules, because they're a statement made by Scott or by Harvey outside of court, and you're offering them for the truth of what they actually say. So you'd have to have an exception there. Could it be a co-conspirator statement? Possibly, but I think it would be difficult if the witness wasn't there to
authenticate the messages,
to authenticate them and to get them admitted. I think that would be a little bit more difficult without him.
Oh, who knows if this guy is going to testify then. So, okay. Just one last question then, and then we'll finally finish. What do you think is the most compelling evidence of Donna's involvement that will result in her conviction? I believe it's the evidence related to money. Yeah, but I mean, I think money is still one nice, good piece of evidence, but she can still explain it by saying she was just paying Katie because it was a favor and Charlie told her to do it. But to me, I thought her wiretap calls with Charlie, where she said it's probably about the two of us, probably the both of us. This TV is about five, all the weird things she said, and her ridiculous phone call with Sammy, the undercover agent, that just made her seem so guilty. What do you think?
I agree. I think the bump and those subsequent calls is the most incriminating thing. And I've said this before, innocent people don't have to talk about whacking a blackmailer. They don't have to talk about, paying off a blackmailer. They go to the police. They're like, these guys are approaching my mother and want money from us. We didn't do any of this. We're going to go to law enforcement immediately. That's what innocent people would do. But they sat there and they talked in code, and just her visceral reaction out on the street when who she thought was a blackmailer approached her. I think that's very incriminating. And I don't think there's an explanation for that. I think she can explain away paying money, writing checks to Katie, who never actually did a job at the Adelson Institute. You could kind of explain that away. Well, that was Charlie's girlfriend, and he told me to take care of her.
Ex-girlfriend, which makes it even stranger. It's like, why are you paying an ex-girlfriend? June didn't get paid after breaking up with Charlie. Like people don't do these big favors once you're not even dating.
Yeah, I agree. And getting her a car and the Lexus and other things that that's
paying for cruise or vacations and
quite a severance package. Yeah, quite a severance package for Charlie's ex-girlfriend. She gets a car and a salary and everything else.
Half of the breast augmentation surgery.
Yeah. But I think the bump is probably the most significant thing with Donna.
Yeah. Okay. I've kept you over an hour and a half, so thank you so much for your time. You have any closing remarks to the audience here?
Well, thank you for having me on. I've enjoyed it, and it's really fascinating to talk about this. And it's been a long road. Over 10 years now, and I'm glad to see the state has really put all the work that they have into this, and I wish the prosecution the best of luck on their trial as we go forward.
Yeah, we'll definitely be watching every day. Like, even if we have work to do, I think I'll probably go back and watch it sped up at 2x speed at night and watch all the YouTube commentary and stuff. So I think it's going to be a pretty exhausting 3 weeks for us, all of us true crime watchers.
I'll definitely be watching it, probably in the car between courthouses and things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you guys for tuning in, and Sunday we're kind of going to do a oldie replay reenactment of the whole June Chinta interview. Like I said, my voice is actually better when I make wacky voices and stuff. So it's I'm kind of limited as to what I can do for live streams and videos, given my vocal and medical problems and stuff. So hopefully people will tune in for that. And I'll have Patty, who is a former Adelson employee. She's been interviewed on this channel, so she's going to help read some of the parts. And Remy is also going to help read. So please join us on Sunday night. Thank you, Jeremy. It's been great talking with you.
Thank you. And I'll be looking forward to seeing that.
Okay, thanks. Have a good night, everybody. Take care.